Hello, Internet. Gino, that Pinguino Greco here again with another episode of Deep Listens, and today is a very special episode because today is emails all the time. And I am joined as always by Billy the Postman Rothert.
I don't know what that's supposed to mean.
It's mail.
I mean,
it's a basketball thing.
Mailman? I guess.
No, I was thinking the Postman, which what's the name?
Courier? Like mail courier?
No, it's a movie starring the dude in Waterworld. What's that guy's name?
Kevin Costner.
Starring Kevin Costner. He is the last mailman.
Sure. Well, anyway,
Tom
thanks
Petty's
everybody for
finest acting.
Thanks everybody for tuning in. I'm excited to go over this entire listener feedback episode.
And we are also joined by Pete, the mailman Busby. There you go. See, there's the basketball one.
Okay. Now I'm there. Now we're with it. What's going on, everybody? Happy to get your feedback and happy to respond to it today. So this week's Animal Facts. I was recently reading an article. Apparently, jaguars are starting to come back to the southern United States. There used to be a whole bunch of them until farmers decided, this isn't really working for us, and they started killing a bunch of them off. But now they're starting to creep back up north. So good news there. We might have jaguars in the U.S. again.
Oh, goody. Which parts? So I can not go there?
As south, like the border of Mexico, basically, is where they're coming through.
That's amazing. They're creeping up into Arizona and New Mexico?
Pretty much.
Dope.
Slowly but surely.
All right.
Barring any walls coming up, of course.
Yeah. Barring any walls coming up and barring... Well, jaguars are crafty. They'll get around it.
That's
They'll
true.
Swim. They'll burrow. They'll pay someone off. They're a very, very clever animal.
We'll get like jaguars and coyotes working together.
Yes, exactly. So if you want to get in touch with the show for our next episode of emails or just want to tell us that this email episode was garbage or great, it's really up to you.
Both good.
Both good.
Both good responses.
You can go ahead and reach us at Deep Listens Pod on Twitter or at That Pinguino on Twitter. You can also send us an email, deeplistenspodcast@gmail.com, or you can hit up our comment sections at deeplistens.libsyn.com. And without further ado, our first email comes from Alex.
Yeah!
Hi, Alex. Thanks for writing in.
And Alex says, I'd like to lodge a formal request for Pete to, for the first time on your podcast, say something positive about the 76ers.
That's a tough one, especially, if we had gotten this email earlier in the season, I might have had an easier time of it. They've been going on a slide as of late. Let me think. You know what? I can say something positive. They finally basically released. They traded him technically, but they finally got rid of Jahlil Okafor. And it's positive only insofar as I felt bad for Jahlil Okafor. And now he actually gets a shot. He was at one point a highly touted player that's been sort of buried on the Sixers through no fault of his own. And I'm happy that he can finally get a chance to start fresh for the Brooklyn. What are they now?
They're the Nets.
The Brooklyn
They're
Nets.
Still the Nets.
Okay.
Yeah. Really? Your nice thing is that they set Jahlil Okafor free, not Ben Simmons, not the process?
Nope. Is Embiid hurt again? His
No.
back was hurting for a while.
He
Is
took
he playing
a game
again?
or two off. Yeah, he took a game or two off, but nothing serious, like just some wear and tear. But he's dunking.
That's the only
on
nice
dudes.
thing I have to say about him.
What? You don't like his nickname?
What, the process?
Yeah.
No, I hated Sam Hinkie. I hate the whole thing. I think it's gross and irresponsible.
But have you seen him when he takes interviews and answers by just saying, I trust the injecting trust the process into everything? So, not Jaleel. So, Joel, what were you thinking at the end of that game? Well, I was really just trusting the process of how we go through our offense, and it all worked out.
I don't support any part of that.
I just trust the process when I'm practicing, when I'm lifting weights, that it's gonna work out. Great. Fine. Wet blanket. Alex also asked, how is ZP holding up as a Kings fan? He's holding up okay.
Is ZP actually a Kings fan?
He is. It's unfortunate.
That is unfortunate.
But he was holding up well when last I spoke with him. Next email comes from Patrick.
Hi, Patrick.
I have hours of podcasts to catch up on, kind of funny, the Bombcast, and no games to play while listening. Do you have any game recommendations? What current or old school releases would make for great material while listening to a podcast?
Well, I'd actually say The Witness would be a really good one because that game was visually stunning, but it had very little in terms of audio. There were times where you'd find like the voice clips, like the little recorder boxes, but that game was just gorgeous to look at, like a piece of art. It was intellectually stimulating in many parts, but you really didn't have to hear the game. So if you want to do something that's visually pleasing and then get your injection of podcast goodness from somewhere else, that'd be a pretty good game to play. Probably Talos Principle too, in sort of a similar respect.
Yeah, I think those are fair.
I think you'd also, I'm sort of a Fire Emblem stan, but I think if we're talking about general genres, turn-based strategy is a good one, because if you need to sort of drift out and concentrate on the podcast for a little bit, it's not going to be sort of fast twitchy where you really need to dial into the game, and then you just basically lose whatever's going on in the podcast either way.
Yeah. And of the games we've played for the show recently, I think Battle Right is a very good podcast game because it is fast-paced. You can get in, get out, quit whenever you want, and it's useful to hear some of what your opponent's abilities are, but it's not that essential. Like, hearing is not as key as it is.
The only time
games.
I care about audio in Battle Right is when I'm playing against a Jade, so I can hear when she snipes invisibly.
Yeah, but as soon as she goes invisible, just assume she's sniping. I mean, I guess timing some of like the dodges and very specific stuff would be a little tougher, but it's not that bad. Just mix your audio a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So I think those are some good podcast games. Here we've got some episode-specific emails. Would you like some Binding of Isaac, some Doki Doki Literature Club, or some Magic School Bus?
I feel like the Binding of Isaac one's gonna talk shit about me and how I was wrong about something. So
yes.
let's go with that one. I'm ready.
Okay, we've got a few Binding of Isaac emails. First up comes from Peter. And Peter says, Billy was in fact wrong, but meh, whatever. Hey guys.
That sounds like something I would say.
I'm a big fan of the podcast. Just thought I'd weigh in on your Isaac talk. There's a lot more to the game than you guys experienced. Spoiler warnings. From your talk, it appears that some of you beat Mom once or twice, and that was about it. After beating Mom, you'll gain access to a new pair of levels called The Womb, where you fight Mom's heart. Don't ask me to explain that anatomy. You then get the option to go up to the cathedral/chest or down to Sheol for one of two final confrontations. I don't blame you for missing this stuff. It takes multiple playthroughs to unlock, and the game is deliberately cryptic. One of you mentioned that the game felt like a rushed Flash game, and that was because it was. Edmund McMullen was completely burnt out after spending years developing Super Meat Boy and decided that his next game would be simple and quick and out the door in a couple of months. Then it came out and people loved it, and he spent the last 6 years updating it and remaking it and adding new stuff. As for symbolism and analysis, there's a lot that would be missed by only seeing as far as the mom fight. Edmund has talked about the meaning behind the game in a few interviews, and here's the deal. It's actually semi-autobiographical. When he was growing up, one side of his family was very strongly religious and condemned him for his interest in video games and D&D and creepy monsters, and all the stuff that you can imagine the creator of Super Meat Boy and Bowl would be interested in as a kid. That being said, I don't view it as a condemnation of religion. It just borrows a lot of imagery. The Bible is a usable item, and if you use it during the mom fight, you automatically win. This game is about a sensitive and creative kid living with unbearable stress in an environment that is actively rejecting him and his ideas. As you go further in the game, there are numerous references to suicide and self-harm. The razor blade item lets you trade health for increased damage. There's a noose called Transcendence that makes you fly, and the final unlockable character in the game is basically Zombie Isaac. In one of the endings, you learn that Isaac's father left him and his mother after his sister Maggie died. Mom went crazy in her grief and abused Isaac. The Maggie you play in the game is Isaac being forced to wear a wig. Cain is Isaac's internal self-blame for her death. The rabbit hole goes deeper, but this message is already too long, so I'll leave it there. Cheers, and good luck on future podcasts. P.S. Please put Final Fantasy VI near the top of your Final Fantasy list. This is, for me, what 9 is for Gino. So thank you, Peter, for that long, very informative email.
Well, I thought I was going to have to like defend myself, but I would just, no, yeah.
I'm sure at
If it
some
was
point
wrong,
you'll have to.
it's fine.
Yeah,
So, I mean,
go ahead.
yeah, that was great feedback. Let me just say, Peter was thorough. He really explained what I was aware of some of these theories already, right? And sort of doing my research for that podcast in the first place. And I just don't, half of them I don't subscribe to, and the other half I don't really think they're that interesting. There is more depth potentially than the game reveals on its surface, but still I don't think it's a particularly interesting interpretation of a lot of those things.
Yeah, I think it draws a lot of biblical imagery in, but I don't know, maybe if it was more explicitly autobiographical instead of allegorical, I would actually think more of it, because then it would be harder to miss. But as the game stands right now, without doing research into interviews and stuff like that, it seems like a kind of gross flippant game, and you have to kind of go out of your way to learn about the creator and all the stuff going on with him to understand it on that deeper level, which I'm glad that there is a deeper level. I mean, there are games that come out and are kind of gross and kind of juvenile that when you look into them, there's nothing else there.
Yeah, perhaps, I mean, I'll say at least for now, perhaps I was a bit flippant in my initial assessment of the game, given this extra level. But even so, I think it still requires a lot of projection and conjecture, more so than would probably be responsible in hard criticism, let's say.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I do like kind of abstracting some of these items out into like tiny little allegories, each of them, or tiny little references, because they seem so random when put together without that connective tissue of the creator's backstory. But then if you can kind of place where these items came from, it makes them seem less random.
I'll say that I like when a game will reward the players that like the game and want to learn more about it and want to learn about the dev and want to explore like the multi-layered facets of what the game's trying to convey and talk about. I just wish that you didn't have to go outside of the game to learn some of those things. Like a lot of games you can find like creator commentary on disc as part of the game's unlockables. That was something that I kind of wish that games would do more of these days. A game that that we played on the podcast was Never Alone. I really liked the commentary and the development behind that game, because the game Never Alone was pretty simple in nature, but like when you had all these interviews and this sort of cultural context that was given, it wove something else new into the game. And it's true that Binding of Isaac may have started as a Flash game, and therefore it had a lot of limitations with what it was going to include. This could have easily just been a person's side project, and none of this information is made public about the developer or whatever implications certain parts of the game may have. But I'll sort of reiterate, I like it when games have something to offer for the fan base that wants to dive in and learn more. I just would like for that to be somewhere more present in the game itself, so that you don't have to like look outside of the media that you're consuming to understand what it's trying to what it's trying to present to you.
So let me just ask a question off of that. So as we mentioned, I think all three of us have voiced, if there was a little bit more of this in the game instead of in interviews, we would have probably appreciated the game as a whole a little bit more, especially what it's trying to do with the allegories and all that stuff. What do you think that would look like if they tried to include that stuff dynamically in the game? Because in Never Alone, the way they handled something like that was in basically videos that you collected and then watched. You could hide that sort of information in text or in collectibles that you pick up that might unravel some more of the personal background. You do some fourth wall breaking in some item descriptions, or maybe in secret rooms or something like that. You might be able to tell a little bit more of the personal story. But I think that it can become pretty difficult depending on what type of game you're making and just how personal you want to get. Because I think for a lot of people, this game is very much just kind of a game. It's a podcast game. It's a pretty decent podcast game. You're just going to play it, listen to something else, not really pay attention. and I don't know that everyone wants the next level.
At least for a game like this, right, where you're right, where it's sort of it's brevity to purpose. It's not, brevity for the sake of just being short. I think potentially one thing you could do if you wanted to make it more explicitly autobiographical is shift from this sort of idea that you're just climbing down into a basement into sort of more real world locales. Like let the environment do a little bit more work for you. And then you don't necessarily get you could still have some of the stranger sort of monstrous bosses. Maybe then you don't get, mom's heart, or you're not just fighting your mother's leg in the mom boss fight. But you could have asked the environments or, the enemy sprites to do a little bit more storytelling work for you in this case without sacrificing that sort of purposeful brevity.
I think that some things that I would look for in a game similar to this would be stuff like unlockable concept art that could have additional descriptions. There could be, like you were saying, maybe like some kind of secret room or like a museum, perhaps. But something that comes to mind, which is a really cool aspect of a game, is the Insomniac Museum from the Ratchet and Clank series. Now, that is the most shining, huge example of a game doing something like this. But we actually saw part of it in we saw something like it in, what was it, Stanley Parable, where like you got to a museum part of the game where it had some stuff about Stanley and some of the development of the actual game. So there's ways that you could implement parts of the game's structure and like the making of into the game. And I don't know. I'm always afraid to say that it wouldn't be hard to do that because I don't know what it's like to make a game in this way, but I'm sure that stuff exists. That concept art probably exists somewhere, and early parts of the game's build probably exist, and it'd be cool for the fans that really like it to see some of that stuff.
Sure, and this is a situation where I'm pretty confident in saying the difficulty is not putting that information into the game somewhere. It's doing it elegantly and doing it creatively. You have some earlier builds or you have some earlier art by the time your game is over and created, but how you're going to expose that to the player in a way that makes it meaningful instead of just kind of feeling like a ROM hack is the real question.
Yeah.
And I'm always interested in seeing how developers tackle that problem.
I'm thinking about like N64 games, PlayStation games, like from back in that era. You would always have like unlockable concept art and unlockable like commentary and stuff. That was a really common thing in a lot of the action adventure platformer games that you had back in the day. So it's not unheard of to have that part of a game's package.
Yeah,
but I could see why this is kind of different.
I think it just changed in the modern day because a lot of that art, a lot of those assets are now divvied out as part of the release plan of the game. It comes out on a website. It comes out a few weeks before the development is finished. Those assets are generally hoarded for other use, for marketing use, instead of doled out as rewards. Because now the rewards are in the form of achievements and things that are built into these systems that are between consoles and between games, instead of trying to make a achievement system within your game that is fed by concept art and audio files and weird character models and stuff like that. It's really a shift. So we've got another email on the Binding of Isaac. I'm just going to skip some of this because this email had some parts that mention story stuff, and I think we covered it. But this comes from Michael from Minnesota. Hello, all.
Minnesota. We got a location.
We do. I wanted to add my thoughts on the Binding of Isaac discussion as I've played Rebirth, Afterbirth, and Afterbirth Plus. Apologies for the length. Feel free to cut some stuff out. Cut it. Now I'm cutting to stuff that is not story-related. In terms of how the game has changed over time, there are new enemies and bosses. Some of these feel like modifiers, while others have completely new attacks and abilities. In terms of items, there are now around 700 unlocks. The main new game mode they added is Greed. In some ways, Greed is a simplified version of the Binding of Isaac, focused on buying unlocks and the items you need while you fight through waves of bosses and enemies in a fixed room. It's less like a Zelda game, but it is still fun as a shorter experience where you have more control over what you want or don't want for your build. For example, you don't have enough coins to buy one item or 2 hearts to heal yourself up before the next encounter. What do you want to do? It's also worth noting the Binding of Isaac has an active mod scene. These range from your typical new items, enemies, and characters to whole expansion packs. Regarding challenges like adding a jump or dodge mechanic to change up the game, I personally prefer keeping the base game the same. The joy of the game is playing with different builds. For example, there's actually items that give you the ability to fly or jump. These are as game-changing in some ways as seeing hidden rooms or firing laser tears. But in the end, the ultimate spirit of the Binding of Isaac is rolling with what you have. Some runs you have 40-plus bombs. Some runs you have maximum amount of hearts. Some runs you are so overpowerful you can walk in and kill everything instantly. You never know what you're going to get. But in order to survive, you should use any advantage you're given, whether that is based on how you move, avoid damage, or kill enemies. Adding another mechanic besides moving and shooting might have some appeal on paper, but for me, I enjoy how simple the game starts and how crazy it can get towards the end of a long run.
I mean, that's the argument for bullet hell, basically, right? Like, I enjoy bullet hell games generally, and they typically don't get any more complicated than move and shoot. But maybe there's just, I don't know, not the same freneticism, or like the new, I don't want to phrase this. It's complication in virtue of, like you said, the increasing number of unlockables, rather than any sort of new use of these sort of seemingly basic mechanics.
Yeah, I think what he's getting at in terms of finding new items that essentially give you those mechanics we were talking about, like when we were floating different changes you can make to the Binding of Isaac to make it a little more complicated. He's basically saying some of those things are there. They are just things that you don't experience every time. Sometimes you get to experience new mechanics. Sometimes you're just, stuck with better tiers than before. But because the game doles out these different mechanics semi-randomly, or completely randomly, you can end up with very, very different gameplay experiences, some that are very interactive and some that are short and quick. I think I'd personally prefer if they just smoothed out the experience a little bit, some of the peaks and valleys, and just made a higher base, a higher floor, instead of having a big disparity between the floor and the ceiling. But smoothing everything towards the middle, I think there's an argument for not doing that, especially in a game where runs are so short. It's not that hard to die and then come back and then see something new. Billy, you have any opinion on that, or nah?
Well, I will say that I am excited whenever a game develops a flourishing mod scene. That's something that always interests me because it means that people who like the game so much want that they like it so much that they want to now create and share their love with the community. And a lot of times the mods of games in some sense do more service to the fans because it takes what the community already liked and distills it and just does more of that. So the game gets even more and more focused. This isn't taking anything away from the developer. The developer of the original game is the one who ignited this flame in people, so they have as much credit for starting this whole thing as the modders do for making an expansion or a new character set or new items or whatever. So that's cool. That's probably my biggest takeaway from this piece of feedback is I'm happy that there is a pretty lively mod scene. There are some entire games out right now that started off as a mod of something else, and it's because the community likes it so much. And adding to a game like Binding of Isaac, because it has such a really adaptable template, it seems like it'd be pretty easy to add a new item drop, add a new mechanic, add a new level, based on the way the game is made. I think that it would lend well for a modding community, so I'm pretty excited about that.
So what do you guys think about modding in terms of adding mods to your game? Because some mods, I feel like at a certain point eclipse the original base game and become the new canonical way that you play, versus other mods where they are understood as being something fundamentally broken or something fundamentally foreign. One that springs to mind where the canonical way to play is kind of to have a mod is the Roses and Wine mod for Final Fantasy VIII on PC. It's a modification that adds the game's PS1 soundtrack back into the game. The PC version has a MIDI soundtrack otherwise, which is garbage. So it's a mod that basically restores this game to its PS1 version, but that's not the version you get when you buy it. It is not the version that came out on PC, even to begin with. But now it's pretty much the only way I'd ever play this game on PC.
Honestly, the closest I've ever gotten to mods is the beginning of like games like NFL Blitz, where you get to, try to hit the three icons, line them up, or like cheat codes in GoldenEye. Whereas like Big Head mode, right?
Big Head mode, classic.
Like that's the move. But like beyond that, I've never really, messed around with mods beyond, personal cheat codes.
I'll say that there's a time and I'm not gonna say there's a time and a place for modding, but because I think there's always modding available if possible. As far as it becoming canon or the way the game should be played, that's another story. I think that there's a lot of different directions you can go with modding. You can take something to the extreme, like God mode or like Hell mode of a game where every single enemy deals crazy damage or one hit kills you, or God mode where it's just a massive bullet hell. One of the games that I have participated in the mod community of the most is Super Smash Brothers. And that's a pretty good example because when you mod Super Smash Brothers, and I personally modded Super Smash Brothers Brawl, that's the version that I modded the most. There were like entire game modes that were made from modding mechanics in that game. So the version that I played was Brawl with just aesthetic changes. So the entire game's mechanics were the same, but there were different costumes for the characters and different music for the stages. And in some cases, stages were retextured, recolored, but all the parts were still there. And sometimes stages that were bad and not competitively viable or not very good to play on in a setting that it was, I guess I should describe our friend group of Super Smash Brothers players was friendly and casual, but we wanted to play in a tournament viable setting. So we didn't play on stages that could like kill you or like side scroll. So you have to run along.
Do you mean to tell me that Poke Floats isn't the greatest map that's ever been made?
Unfortunately, I think Poke Floats is like a counterpick viable tournament like legal stage because there's so few that are, and that was one of the ones that was the least offensive. It probably made the cut by a small margin, but I think actually Pokefloats is like a counterpick viable stage. Anyway, I'm getting off track of my point. When I modded Super Smash Bros. Brawl, I could just turn on only the visual aesthetic changes, but I could also play Brawl Plus, which was an early attempt to rebalance the game for additional fairness, and it actually changed the character's mechanics. Brawl Minus was supposed to be a joke, where every character's moves were, just filled the screen with hot bullshit, and it was great for a few rounds, but you don't play that game the whole time. Project M came later when they tried to take Super Smash Bros. Brawl and turn it into effectively the mechanics and style of Super Smash Bros. Melee, and that's in a scene where modding of a game changed, one, just its visual aesthetic, but it also could have just made a fun, wacky game mode, but it also tried to redefine how this game should be played. So in a microcosm, that particular mod community was huge, and I think that's a very prominent and good example of what modding can be for a game. One slight tangent here, I think another really good way to mod a game is to add something very, very small, but adds a great layer of complexity to a game. For example, one of the most popular mods in Skyrim, just outside of the podcast, I'm playing my very first playthrough of the Elder Scrolls Skyrim.
Wait, so your first playthrough, so you're what, 300 hours in? Or
I'm only like 100 hours in.
One playthrough. 100 hours.
But one of the most popular mods for that game, if I'm recalling this correctly, I was looking this up a little bit just for fun a couple weeks ago. I think one of the most popular mods is adding just something as simple as weapon durability. Because some of the earlier Elder Scrolls games had it, and it was a feature that some of the more diehard fans were missing, that it was like kind of too easy. You just got a good weapon and you kept it for the whole game. And you could make the game more interesting or challenging if you had weapon durability. That was something that's pretty small. It's like you add a meter to your weapon, and when it hits 0, the weapon disappears from your inventory. Well, they already have something just like that for how the enchanted weapons work, so it already kind of existed in the game. It could have been a pretty simple mod, but that added a small layer of complexity that was for the diehard fans, and it was rewarding for them, but it didn't really seek to subvert the entire game's meaning or message. That's about all I have to say about modding of games.
You know what I'd be... Yeah, Gina, if you have a point on modding, make it, because I'm going to move on just slightly.
Yeah, all I was going to say was I think it's a very fascinating gray space between fan fiction and just small augmentations and tweaks, because I know that there are plenty of games like Skyrim where people have added in single features like that, like durability, something very small that will drastically change the way the existing game plays.
Like a hunger scale too, like having a hunger meter.
Stuff like that. All sorts of stuff like that. But
you have to eat food.
You can also make fan fiction. You can add entire levels. You can add entire quest lines. You can create buildings. You can create spaces. And I think that the modding can walk this fine line. And it's always odd to me when when does the fan fiction become canon? Basically, when has a mod been so successful that now this is the way we play? This is now the way that everyone experiences it. Because there's some games where usually it's something technical like that something becomes the new canon, when it's just like a technical modification that makes the game way easier or way better, like adding a HUD onto an MMO or something, or a more useful macro than what's built into the game. But I would be very fascinated to hear, and maybe someone who's listening knows this better than me, if there's been a case where a fan mod that has added in content, not just a subsystem, has actually become the canonical way that people play.
I'd be curious too, right? Like, this might be going on a lot more than I recognize. But sort of as literature moved into modernism, and then even more so postmodernism, you started to see these works that were basically reevaluations of classic texts from the perspective of minor characters in those texts, right? So you see Wide Sargasso Sea is a retelling of Jane Eyre, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Guildenstern are dead. That's from Hamlet. Grendel is a retelling of Beowulf from Grendel's perspective. And I wonder if sort of as video games become a more mature medium, or if this is already happening, if you have these sort of revisions from minor character perspectives going on. And I think that could be an area in which, maybe the modding community rises up and, pursues an avenue like that.
Yeah. I'll be very interested to see it. I know that there are definitely games that have been remade like that as a sequel or a prequel, but I have not seen that. I'm not aware, at least, of mods that have done that sort of stuff, but it'd be very interesting. So we've got this is one of the odder email chains that we got. This comes from Chris. We got 2 emails from ZP for this show, from Chris Zombie Pie Redacted, and the first one was about the Magic School Bus, because I had a guest on who is a former marine biologist, and we went on some tangents about farm fishing on our Magic School Bus Explores the Ocean episode, and ZP had something to say about this. He said, "Dear Fearless Leaders, it's me again. I'm sending this email because I shared this information to Gino on Steam Chat, and he asked if I could share it on the proper podcast. During your Magic School Bus episode, former marine biologist Harry Gans and noted plant eater Gino questioned if farmed salmon was better for the environment than freshly caught. The 2 podcast participants theorized that farm fish was better for the environment as it does not disturb already critical ecosystems. This sentiment is partially correct. Aquaculture technology has shifted dramatically since its inception, and sustainability has significantly improved in the United States and New Zealand. Indoor recirculating tanks and freshwater net pens are the best possible way to farm fish, as they both have minimal impacts on the environment and do not promote parasites. But these sorts of technological improvements have not been distributed to fish farms across the globe, which crowd together thousands of fish in their artificial environment. For example, the Monterey Bay Aquarium's Seafood Watch ranks wild-caught Washington pink salmon as best choice, but farmed coho salmon in Chile as avoid. Waste products, including feces, uneaten food, and dead fish, are flushed into the environment, and lax regulations are not responsive enough to growing concerns. For example, never buy seafood from Vietnam. Their catfish and shrimp farms are not at all regulated and have raised the salinity in already vulnerable tropical forests. Regardless, there are other concerns about aquaculture. The process of fish farming releases nutrients such as nitrogen and phosphorus from fish feed into the marine environment in a soluble form. These nutrients can enhance the growth of aquatic plants and algae. The Fisheries Research Service, or FRS, has developed mathematical models to predict the level of nutrient enhancement in sea locks arising from fish farming, but the parasites have been growing in population since the proliferation of fish farming. Then there's the issue of economy of scale. Fish that is not farmed or caught locally is transported on massive refrigerated shipping tanks. These shipping tankers have an enormous environmental impact and can further disturb the environment. Even if you purchase sustainably raised fish from New Zealand or Canada, how that produce is transported is beyond problematic. The economies of scale are part of the reason why farmers' markets have a worse environmental impact than factory farm food at Walmart or Costco. The evidence is clear that organic farming on any meaningful scale is significantly less land efficient than conventional farming, but requires just as much and sometimes more space. And organics' refusals to use GMOs could be potentially harmful to the environment with the introduction of non-disease resistant plant strains. Holy shit, I'm going to stop now because it looks like I've written 2 paragraphs about fish for a podcast. What am I doing with my life? So that's ZP talking about fish farming, and I thought, first, I'll let you guys respond. Then I've got a response from Harry.
So, first off, why does ZP know all this? Did he just do a little independent research?
He's an eclectic man. I don't know.
Right.
He knows a lot of weird facts.
I appreciate that sort of wide-ranging scholarship. I think he's going to get us in trouble with the organic community, or the farm-to-table community, I should say.
Look, it really depends on how farm-to-table you're getting. If you're actually next to a farm,
right? If you're walking over and you're like, "Hey, let me snag this,"
and you can get it to your table very quickly, then you're probably fine. It's more of a matter of, well, I want this. The farm is in Oregon, but I want to eat it in Florida. Yeah. Then you're probably doing more damage than good. I'm afraid you'll just have to eat your Florida farm food. What a shame. So
I don't have much weigh in here, because I don't really eat fish at all. So, yeah, it's just not really a big part of my diet.
I ate sushi last night.
Fish is good, man.
I'd like to point out too that Gino's not a vegetarian because he likes animals. It's just that he hates plants.
I hate them so much. Look, they just grow. You leave them alone, and if you leave them alone for too long, they get bigger.
Soaking up all that sunshine, the greedy bastards.
All that water.
Well, it's not that I don't eat fish ever, but I feel like I'm just not really participating in any of that to a degree. So,
well,
you exist.
You exist in the world, and you consume food. So I'm pretty sure you do.
Yeah, but in theory, if I didn't eat fish at all, I'd be completely out of that causal chain.
Would you, though?
Yeah, I think we'd have to discuss that one. But that'd be a lengthy discussion.
Because I think we would track, and then it's like, oh, well, you ate a piece of meat that ate a fish, and then the fish was provided by up the food chain.
I'm sure if you wanted to get to the sort of
drink
infinite regression of ways that fish somehow came into my diet, I guess you could, but...
So lots of beers are filtered either with or through an ingredient in fish bladders.
Well, I don't drink beer.
The clarity. Oh, damn, you got me, Billy. I thought I had you.
Nope.
He drinks the brown stuff.
Well, whiskey's made out of fish eyes, too. They say it's like corn rye and things, but it's not. It's fish eyes.
It's fish eyes. Nothing but fish eyes.
The scotch that I drink comes from Aberdeen, Scotland, where they mix it with fish bones that they slaughtered that day. I drink scotch and mead. Those are my preferred
Mixed together.
libations. No, not mixed together.
When they say that the whiskey looks back into you, it's because it's fish eyes.
That's amazing.
So, here was Harry's response. I really liked your comment. It is absolutely correct, and I overgeneralized in comparing farmed to wild-caught salmon. Take that, Harry! I did not distinguish between the more environmentally friendly, intensive farming practices in countries like the U.S., Norway, and Japan, and the less environmentally friendly, extensive farming practices that occur mostly in developing regions. I still think that if your goal is to eat fish and you want to have the least impact on the environment you can, farming is, on average, better than wild-caught, but I concede that this is a very rough rule of thumb and has many exceptions, some of which you already pointed out. I never really considered the transportation problem, but it exists for both farmed and wild-caught fish. That being said, there are specific cases where it might be better to eat locally caught fish than distantly farmed fish. Ultimately, like any issue, the reality is more complex than can be contained within a 5-minute digression in an hour-long podcast about the Magic School Bus.
Hour-long?
Hour-long podcast about the Magic School Bus.
We have had an hour-long podcast.
Maybe you should start a podcast of your own about agricultural policy, then you wouldn't have to question what you're doing with your life. It's a great point. In retrospect, I should have gotten ZP onto the show so that he could be told to start an agricultural podcast. He'll find out. He'll listen to the show, and then he'll know his true calling. We were also sent an email from ZP with a request. He says, hey, everyone, it's me again. I know your Dust and Elysian Tale podcast is ancient history, but I just want to put out there that Dean Doudrell, the creator of Dust, has a new game, Never Stop Sneakin', set to release soon, and I was wondering if any of you are interested in picking it up, and if not, have you seen the announcement trailer for the game? Never Stop Sneaking is a stealth action game centered on time manipulation. Yes, the game is currently a Switch exclusive, but goddammit, I am so happy this man is still making video games. Also, I very much appreciate how the man is still attached to fully committing to one gameplay concept per game. Plus, the game looks like it has a good sense of humor and better plays off the developer's limited resources. The game has a character named Vice President Helicopter, who is an actual helicopter. Seriously, watch the trailer if you haven't already. That game looks great. It's a parody of Metal Gear Solid.
Nice. I think I would play more like games made by that person because I liked a lot of things mechanically about Dust. So yeah, I would definitely be interested in exploring more from that dev.
Yeah, I'd never heard of it, but I'm always on board for time travel.
Yeah, Never Stop Sneakin' is not like Dust at all. It is a third-person isometric stealth game that looks like a PS1 game, like polygonal graphics and everything.
It looks like really old Metal Gear Solid.
Yes, MGS1.
Yeah.
And I believe you're trying to stop an evil, I think the guy's name is Amadeus, and he's kidnapped.
Yeah, I just looked it up. Let me find it again.
Amadeus Guildenstern, I think is his name.
That sounds right.
That's amazing.
And he's the problem is he's kidnapped all the presidents. He's created a time machine and kidnapped all the presidents, and you need to because he wants to become the president, and he will only give the other presidents back. Yeah, he will only give the other presidents back if we make him president.
Gotcha.
So you need to stop him.
That makes sense.
And his cabinet of pain.
That is wild.
Dr. Acula, Vice President.
Dr. Acula as in Dracula?
No,
it's
Dr. Acula.
He's a medical professional, Billy, right?
He's very good.
Happens to be a phlebotomist.
But yes, we will put that into consideration. In terms of other suggestions we got another email suggesting a game request from Peter. Hello, and thank you for such a great podcast.
You're welcome.
You're welcome. I love all that all of you bring to the table with your various perspectives and uniquely good insights. Thank you. I email you because I'm dying to direct your perspectives and insight to a game I just finished on the Nintendo DS, Nights in the Nightmare. I'm working on a blog post on it right now, but I'd love to hear how you'd navigate a podcast through this insane baddie. Whoever could have thought of this game?
What kind of nights?
Knights. And Nightmare, though, unfortunately, is spelled Nightmare. It should have been. Yeah, that's unfortunate. It's got a lot. He explains more things about it, and I don't want to spoil you guys, but it's on the docket. We will eventually get to Nights in the Nightmare.
It looks wild, so I'm on board.
Yeah, we all have DSs, so we can play this. Now let's go to some more feedback for Doki Doki Literature Club. Now everyone has played that, correct?
No, I haven't played all of it yet.
No.
You should play all of it. It's really good. From Austin. Hey, Deep Listen's B team. After much debate, I gave Doki Doki Literature Club a try and ended up feeling many of the same emotions as Gino and Chris expressed on the podcast. Do not worry, as I felt it was an overall positive experience. There's one thing I'd like to add. Something you briefly discussed but did not extrapolate upon was how Monica shows the pitfalls of the relationships anime and gaming audiences have with their content creators. These safe environments you two mentioned in the podcast could be exploited to disastrous effect. To that end, I think Monica is a partial word of caution of that relationship. At any moment, visual novel and anime creators could abuse the sway they have over their audience. Their audiences place a great deal of trust in their content creators to provide exactly what they want. And while studios who make this content do not abuse this relationship entirely, at any point they could become Monica. People bake cakes for anime characters and celebrate the birthdays of those characters. What would happen if the creators of these shows and games abused this power?
That's interesting. Yeah, I think there's a question to be asked about whether or not content creators of any stripe have any sort of moral, might not be the best term, might be more ethical, any sort of ethical responsibility to their audience. Like if they need to consider, okay, how do people think about my characters? Or if, as the creator, they have sole autonomy in deciding, how their story unfolds. It's an interesting moral question.
Yeah, and I think it's extra interesting in the context of visual novels or games that are, I guess, have shown to be, I don't want to say addictive. I don't know that that's necessarily the term I want. But it seems like people sometimes lean into visual novels and games like this that are trying to create false intimacy between a player and a character, and that is the primary product that's being sold, is a story but also some false intimacy.
You mean like a specifically
illusion.
Romantic intimacy?
Yeah, or just friendship intimacy. Like some of these games, they are very much about embodying a person who is creating friendships or romances or relationships that are reliable, dependable, and can be replayed over and over and over again.
Yeah.
There isn't really anything else there generally is not anything else going on in the game other than the experience of making friends with these people. And I think over time we've shown, there are people who have tried to marry their DS legally because they got the ending where your character proposes to one of the characters on these games. You can find people who need something to lean on emotionally who might not be adjusted in the way that they can really frame this properly. These sorts of games. They can confuse the illusion of intimacy that the game's creating with actual intimacy. And I do think that these games can sometimes be exploitative on that dimension. And I don't think you need to necessarily think about the ethics in a wide scale the way you would with something like the monetization scheme in an MMO or in a free-to-play game where everyone is exposed to that and the Skinner box tactics are going to kind of work their insidious work on everyone. But a bad suggestion or some sort of abuse of power with a dating sim or a game like this that requires so much emotional investment, I feel like if you screw up, you only need to screw up a little for something really bad to happen.
It's interesting as well to posit in sort of sort of a subtly different direction. Insofar as like this intimacy is predicated a lot on, maybe not predicated, But this is an intimacy in which the opposite party, namely the character in the game, has no autonomous agency of their own, right? They're just sort of, acting within the confines of their environment. So this, Doki Doki Literature Club specifically asks, okay, what happens when we give these characters agency, right? If we make them basically their own being. And, maybe the gamer's not going to like that. Maybe this relationship didn't unfold in the way you hoped it would. And I think that becomes a much more interesting question as well, right? Like, okay, like in a, if you remember the movie Her that came out before, right?
Yep.
This is sort of, all right, what happens when you fall in love with a computer program, but the computer program has other ideas, right? It becomes an interesting question to ask.
Yeah. There's this presupposition that the character that you're romancing will always be the same and will not change and wants exactly what you think they want.
Mm-hmm. Wants exactly what you want them to want.
Yeah.
I'll say that I want there to be emotional investment between the player and the characters that they're interacting with. I just don't know if romance is the right way to do that. I went to PAX and I went to one of the panels on relationships in games and how they're handled in some of the newer games and some of the good ways, some of the bad ways. I won't rehash that entire panel. I think I actually talked about it in one of our earlier podcasts.
Yeah, you have.
And one of the examples that I mentioned was the relationship between Wander and Argo in Shadow of the Colossus. So the character and his horse, there's no romance there, but that was an emotional investment that I built from the beginning of the game to the end of the game that was done elegantly. It was really simple, but it was elegant. And some other games where romance is an option, like Mass Effect or maybe Skyrim or any other of these relationship-based games. I shouldn't call Skyrim a relationship-based game. It's more of an option because everything's an option in that game. But yeah. I'm getting off track. I want there to be meaningful character relationships, but they don't have to be romance. Actually, come to think of it, Pete, Kingdom Hearts might be a pretty good example of building emotional investment in character in interactions that aren't necessarily built on romance.
I mean, Kingdom Hearts is a great example of every great thing in the world. So,
I feel like we've just lost the entire message I was trying to make, but I'm down for building emotional investment. I know that romance is hard to do that properly with, but then again, the consumer base probably wants a little bit of that. That might be what we want the most of.
Yeah. And I think it's a fine line you walk.
What kind of commentary does that lead to if, as game consumers, one of the things that we want the most of is simulated romantic connection?
Yeah. It's
probably nothing good.
Probably nothing good. It's a big ethical question.
It's hard to do in real life. It is harder to do in a game unless the game makes it too easy, and then it creates this weird, vicious cycle of dating sims.
Yeah, I think that Austin gets to a good point, that there's an ethical question here that we very rarely grapple with. We're often talking about how to create a more realistic relationship or how to create game stories that seem more dynamic without asking what does it do to someone when they are exposed in the long term. Yeah, there's the should question, but also like if we should, what are the actual parameters here? What is okay? What is not? Because I feel like we often go to the extremes of, games, violence in games, if you participate in it enough, it does nothing to you. It means nothing. Versus, there's causation between if you play violent games, you do something else. Where the reality is a gray area in between. It doesn't do nothing to you, but it might not, set you down a destructive path all by itself. And so dealing with those muddy gray areas between causalities is, I think, that's where the research lives. That's where the sociologists and the psychologists come in. But I think that, video game ethics is a burgeoning field that I'm looking forward to seeing what comes out of it. Because as a medium that people are interacting with more and more every year, I think codifying some set of ethics for what is okay to simulate, how you should simulate it, what is definitely beyond acceptability getting those things out there and getting high-level philosophy about what to do will help at least direct intentionality instead of having people stumble into big pit holes without knowing, big, pitfalls without realizing it.
I don't want there to be stuff that's off limits to make a game about. I want there to be important conversations about how to do these things correctly. I mean, I think you're still getting onto a good point. Like, some stuff we should be not really afraid, but we should take making games about some stuff really seriously. To the Moon was a game that really well handled a character that had a mental illness.
For the record, I'm not saying that certain subjects should be entirely off the grid. You can't do that. But I think similarly to the way that we have restrictions on certain types of research, certain types of like psychological studies. When my sister was performing a psychological study for school, there was a requirement that if at any time the person came in, after being asked the questions for her study, if the person who came in to participate in the survey felt more distressed than when they came in, she had to show them a fun duck video to make them feel better. It's not that the question she was asking could not be asked. There was just a process to make sure that someone who was potentially disturbed by the questions or upset in some way was emotionally not left in that place by the time they left the room. It doesn't mean you can't ask hard questions. It means you come up with a codified way of making sure that those hard questions and those disturbing topics do not leave people in an emotionally vulnerable state. And those are the sorts of things that just aren't codified with games. They're not codified for a lot of stuff, but it'll be nice if we can delve into difficult topics without potentially doing damage. Like with Doki Doki Literature Club specifically, after playing through the first playthrough, I guess, of that game, I uninstalled the game and had a very bad experience. I couldn't sleep for a night. I thought that they were being flippant about a subject that I took very seriously. If I had known upon booting up the game the second time that it was going to go to a place where the cause of the trouble was a sentient program and not, hey, these characters are depressed and you're just going to watch them hurt themselves. Like, these characters are inherently flawed due to some sort of mental illness and they're just going to hurt themselves and there's nothing you can do about it. That's what I thought it was going. It turned out that it was telling a completely different story. But if there was some way it could have been communicated to me that, there's something going on here besides the self-harm, besides the depression that you should see and stick around for, I would have stuck around a lot more. I had to be convinced by other people outside of the game that it was going to get better for me to do that. But if the game had known, oh, this is a really triggering topic, this is really difficult, we need to find a way to dial people back in. Now, it's hard when it's a horror game and kind of what you're going for is that surprise in that moment, but it's the balance, of putting people on tilt versus reining them in so they're having an enjoyable experience, giving them nightmares, but also giving them the ability to cope with those nightmares without something drastic happening.
I think that one of the ultimate things that this line of inquiry has gotten us to is a reiteration and a realization of what the three of us are trying to push for here, which is, this is essentially a video game book club where we talk about games, but we're really trying to examine them in cultural context and ask how do these topics in these games or this particular mechanic in a game, what does it say about who we are as a society, how we handle specific issues? That's one thing that I like about our show. We are able to talk about this kind of stuff and say, well, how does this mechanic reflect on us as the player or us as the media consumer that created the market that produced this? I agree, and I think you're right. We shouldn't have topics off the table. We should have topics explored in responsible ways. And I think, and while I'm sorry that you had a weird experience with Doki Doki Literature Club, I'm more and more anticipating me getting through that game so that I can see more of what is, I guess, part of this discussion because I unfortunately can't participate that much right now.
Yeah. You
But
should
in
see it. It's worth seeing, but
in general, the topic of a game hitting hard like visuals or hard discussion points or hard things to talk about. I want that to happen because I want video games to advance into a level of, I guess, cultural artifact like movies and music and poetry and art and everything. This should be no different. One thing that is going to raise the stakes is that this is interactive, so the viewer has a part to play. If there is a scene where you have the option to maybe shoot someone or not shoot someone, you're not watching a film and you're not reading a book where you can just, I don't know, like stop reading or the thing's already been written for you. If you're going to proceed through that scene, you have to press a button and make a choice to pull the trigger or not. And that's kind of a crude example, but it illustrates that there's more at stake here for the consumer and more responsibility on the developer.
yes. And another question, another bit of feedback from the Doki Doki Literature Club episode comes from JD. Hey, Deep Crew, are any of you familiar with the game Fran Bow? All of your discussion lately of psychological horror that addresses mental illness has reminded me of what a great game that is. It's one of the best point-and-click adventure games I've ever played, although I don't know if I'd recommend playing it right now since you've been playing all these other games. You might want to take a break from the genre. However, if you ever want psychological horror with a dose of whimsy and a big heart, I highly recommend it. We will put that on the list. Put it on the list. So, question. Do we want to deal with our Game of the Year feedback first? Let's do Game of the Year feedback, then we've got some more general questions. We'll end with some fun story time. So, Game of the Year feedback. First, coming from Angel, or Angel. Here are my takeaways from the Game of the Year podcast. 1. I'm with Billy. Pyre got robbed. It presents a beautiful world, is a blast to play, and is a deviation from Supergiant Games' previous outings. 2. Speaking of which, this was the saltiest I have ever heard Billy on a podcast. 3. Gino must be enthused with crayons and coloring kits at chain restaurants because that's the only explanation I have for his defensive magic pendule in every category. 4. Don't fuck with ZP when you insult his anime bullshit because he will ice any fool who does. 5. ZP doesn't like Life is Strange. Actively dislike seems incredibly harsh. 6. You should give each host a point whenever a game they brought to a podcast won a category. Whoever has the most points is deemed the king of the trenchies. Thank you, Angel. Those are some great points. Point 1, I think I've come around to the idea that Pyre got robbed. We might have made a mistake, but I don't really know what it would have won.
Yeah, in what category? Yeah, like...
That's the thing. When I was making my personal Game of the Year list, I realized Pyre was 2, but I couldn't, because of the way our categories were broken up, there was nothing I would unseat. Like, the only thing I thought maybe Pyre could have won was Best Mechanic over PUBG.
Nah.
Maybe. Like, that's the only thing that I saw, because it was just put head-to-head with other really good games. And, you know, the Game of the Year list that I put together was for 2017. Like, some of the awards that it could have definitely won, it was, like, put against all-time great games. Like, Best Soundtrack. Pyre's is really good, but Final Fantasy X is a fucking amazing soundtrack.
I thought a lot about... So I think in response to Pyre getting robbed, and yes, I was salty. And yeah, I thought about it a lot over the last couple of weeks. And where I stand is a lot of the reasons why PUBG won was because the concept of a 100-person free-for-all battle royale was painted as being pretty like new and innovative, and it hadn't really been done before. And I was like, what set me off was that I knew that just wasn't really true, and it wasn't that special to me, but I couldn't think of why, and I couldn't think of any examples. And they came, so I really couldn't make a very strong counter argument, but they came to me later, like quite a bit later. And the novelty of PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds spawning, because of this well-done mechanic, spawning so many other games was also those were also points for PUBG. And I'm not going to pitch the entire Pyre versus PUBG. That's not what I'm trying to do, but I felt like there was an argument that I wanted to make that I couldn't form then, but I can now. So there was 2 points that I wanted to reply to specifically. One was the idea of a sort of multi-person free-for-all battle royale situation. That's been done before. One example that comes to mind is Arma 2 was modded and it produced DayZ. It wasn't the exact kind of 100-person free-for-all, but it still was an every person for themselves. There is permadeath in that game. You have to restart. A lot of the I guess being good at that game means lasting the longest, kind of like it does in PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. So that had been kind of done before and done well. There have been versions of other first-person shooter games that tried to do this, but only due to technical limitations could they not handle a 100-person free-for-all. Either by the game not being able to support 100 people on one map or otherwise. So to me, that novelty just didn't seem good enough to carry the weight of being best mechanic. Furthermore, other games, it's not that interesting that copycats came around about PUBG, because so many other copycat games exist from other cool ideas originally. For example, Dota 2 is a copycat, or sorry, not a copycat, a mod of Warcraft 3, and then original Dota was the first of the MOBA genre that spawned Heroes of New Earth and League of Legends and Smite and all those other MOBAs now. So what Battlegrounds brought to the table, I couldn't articulate the points then because I didn't have the examples in my mind to help me support my arguments, but the things that were listed as being cool and innovative about Battlegrounds, that didn't seem true to me, and now I realized why. I had the examples just now that I gave some of them. And the idea of systematically deleting party members from your story was so fresh to me, and maybe someone else who knows more about RPGs, maybe Gino, knows of a game that has done that, have systematically deleted members of your party rather than adding more and more and more. That seemed so fresh and new to me that I was blown away why it didn't win the coolest mechanic, because Battlegrounds seemed so not new and interesting to me, and Pyre did.
Well, in Mass Effect 2 jumps to mind. In the last moments of that game, you can lose party members depending on how you played and what missions you took on. It can have moments, but it doesn't do it as a long form sort of thing the way that Pyre does. Pyre is a loss, inevitable loss, over and over and over again, versus some of these other games where it tends to be inflection points, moments of extreme loss, but otherwise it's build up, and then like a roller coaster, just like party members might be gone left and right.
Pyre's getting repeatedly punched in the chest, with a set interval.
Yeah. Yes, but I would say that some of the examples like DayZ and Arma, though they are similar to PUBG, some of the very specific things that PUBG did were just so much. I think some of it is that Arma and the games like DayZ, or Arma at least, is very specifically like a military sim, and some of the specific mechanics that you have to get into to play that game at all or play it well, it's just such a higher barrier to entry than something like PUBG that it ends up making it. I would never have played Arma. I would never have played most of these modes that are PUBG like, because that game is just inscrutable to me. Versus something like DayZ, where yes, there is this survival thing and it's closer, but the idea of the jumping out of the plane, the circle, the slow burn down, all the different items, and even how the map is laid out, I think all of those things come together to form something that's greater than the sum of its parts, even though some of the ideas came from other places. Just like I think that Pyre takes the idea of losing party members that, that has happened, individual party members, and it dials that up. There's the most iconic one, I think, in gaming history is Aerith dying in Final Fantasy VII, and that gut punch just happens over and over and over again in Pyre. Though at a certain point it becomes routine instead of surprising. The first time someone leaves, it's like, wait, what the heck? But then after it's the fifth person who leaves, it's more of the game is just more of a rumination on loss. But I don't think that I would change the winner of that category. I don't know maybe Pyre could have won Best Visuals, but I think Hyper Light Drifter was a worthy winner to go up against.
Yeah, I'm not going to take anything from Hyper Light Drifter that won 2 categories.
Yeah.
That was a contender for my GOTY, but like I think that Hyper Light Drifter was in like my personal top 3, but it would never have beaten Pyre.
Mm-hmm. And Pete, do you have any?
No,
we hashed it out.
Yeah, you guys, litigated that discussion pretty well. I wouldn't have picked Pyre for anything really because I didn't enjoy Pyre all that much.
That's true.
Yeah.
And in terms of me liking restaurant coloring kits, I do in fact draw every time crayons are available. So yes, that's true. I will not be intimidated for my love of Magic Pendule. I wish we had the technology for me to play music from the Magic Pendule OST because that is where I feel it was robbed. Not that it should have won it, but man, that soundtrack's good in spots. Let's see. Any of the other points here? We are not going to get into a pedantic who won the most categories thing because I don't like associating a single game with a single person. And
Yeah.
I don't like the idea of being in competition about which of these games are most deserving of praise because oftentimes we all like some of these games just to varying degrees. And I don't want it to be openly confrontational on a personal level.
Yeah, and most of the time it's the case, like, if one of us didn't pick it, eventually somebody else would have.
Yeah. I'm just kind of surprised Life is Strange didn't do better.
So was I. I mean, that was my pick for what was going to win everything. Originally, that was what I was going to argue for, but Detention was my number 2. So when the consensus formed around Detention, I liked both of those games so much. I really had a hard time picking between the two of them in the first place. So second piece of feedback from our Game of the Year podcast comes from JD. I agree with Billy's saltiness. PUBG doesn't have a particularly interesting or original mechanic. You may have found it lots of fun, but I didn't agree with the final decision either. Persona 5 was my personal Game of the Year, so I'm kind of surprised it didn't do better here because there was a lot of enthusiasm for it earlier. Everyone quickly crossed it off their lists. I think it just came down to we all liked Persona 5, but not enough to dethrone other things.
Mm-hmm.
No one came away with a negative experience, but it wasn't so... It was so hit or miss in spots and it was so fucking long.
Well, I think one of our biggest critiques was how the game finished. It did not finish strong. Yeah. There was a big mechanical part of the game
that rubbed a lot of us the wrong way. Although it rubbed me the right way in the wrong way. Yes.
For some of it. Mementos was a part where grinding was completely enabled for me, and that was good, but it was also terrible at the same time.
Yeah. Just because the game was able to set you up with a dopamine drip did not mean that was good for you or for anyone.
Right. I mean, I loved that game's first 2/3, and I think we all did. We're pretty resolute that the last 30% of that game just kind of was underwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it had good story, but getting to it wasn't. It didn't execute that part very well. We're not saying Persona 5 is a bad game.
No, it's a great game.
It was a so let's just say this. I think that we could have easily made strong arguments for Persona 5 to stay and maybe get to the top 3 or something. But I think one of the reasons why we knew and maybe crossed off Persona 5 too early was because we knew that our all 3 of us having the same mutual problem with it was going to prohibit it from getting to first place. And because we knew that it wasn't going to get to first place, it was just an easy cut.
Yeah. And ZP also was not on the keep Persona 5 to win train.
I think when we I think when we eliminate things off the category, we're not striking off the bad games first. We're just looking for the games that we know aren't going to win first place.
Yeah.
And the games that stick around are ones that we're legitimately thinking this could possibly win first place. Except in some cases where Gino puts games on there like Sonic Chronicles: The Dark Brotherhood for every single category last year.
Well, I wanted it to lose every
You
category.
wanted it to be the first loser in every single category, which I guess served a different mechanical purpose, true.
I wanted to kick that game as many times as I could. We put it in the worst story category and then made it lose that category because fuck that game. It deserved to win nothing.
Because Silent Hill For the Room just happened to also be that. I mean, that was amazing.
Fuck that story, man. Yeah, but I think that ultimately it's just because of how our structure is. We are not going for a top 10 list. We are not structuring the winners and there's a winner and then there's everything else, which allows us to cut to some of the more extreme, to some of the most essential arguments instead of getting pedantic about, well, is Persona 5 the second best game or the third best game? Because there is the best game and then everything else. And if you were nominated for that at all, or if we, kept you in the discussion, you know that we cared for the game. When we made cuts, like, okay, which of these games could we even see winning? If you were in that section, you made that first line of cuts, you would have ended up in our top 10 if we ended up with a top 10. But I just don't want to have a bunch of really pedantic arguments about Persona, games that have nothing in common. PUBG versus Persona 5, which one's better?
I don't know. They both have shooting.
Yeah. You have a gun.
Do you ever hold up somebody in PUBG?
You can.
Do you ever do a hold up?
You can.
I guess you could. Yeah.
It takes role playing though.
Interesting. All right, pressing on.
Yeah, let me see. All right, this email comes in from Superfan Kyle. These are our last emails for the day. Hey, Deep Crew. Sorry to take up a bunch of time, as I always do with these emails, but I've got a few silly questions for the email extravaganza. Number one, so I'm going to read these off each one at a time. We will respond, and then we'll read the next one. So, 1, if you could adapt or take inspiration from any literature, movie, or music when making a game, what would it be, and what would the game look like? How would it play? For example, I'd like to see a game inspired by DMX's X Gon' Give It To Ya that's just a tower defense game set in DMX's backyard, where you set up different breeds of dogs to deter home invaders. The game would run infinitely until you lose, but instead of a game over, it transitions to a Muso-style game where you play as DMX, brawling it out with thousands of would-be thieves. Nothing happens to the dogs, by the way. Their HP is a sleepiness meter.
Okay, that's a great suggestion. Someone make that game right now.
So games based on songs? Is that what we're...
literature, movie, music, anything.
Okay.
Inspired by something that isn't a game.
All right. So I have two. One that I think is a great idea. If anybody's ever read Ender's Game, they might have even tried... I think we've talked about this before, actually, and they might have tried to build a game. But there are so many things in Ender's Game. Like, they just literally play multiple video games in there that would be great. So maybe that's cheating. But the other one I think would be great would be Moby Dick as a survival horror game. Because you have basically you have an immortal whale that's, you go out on the sea and you have to deal with him. And then even the ship itself, you have Ahab. You have this sort of shadowy secret harpooner crew that he's got rolling around. I think you'd have two incredible environments from which to build a pretty cool survival horror game.
The monster is the madness.
Yeah, right. And it speaks to metaphor. I think it'd be good.
That actually sounds like a legitimately good game. Billy?
Sorry, I have one more now. I just thought of it.
Oh, go ahead.
If you took Atlas Shrugged and turned it into a train tycoon game, a really dark, grim one, where the whole world's trying to stop you.
I just want to build trains. Why won't these parasites stop me?
These
Why do
damn
they keep
socialists?
Can we actually come back to me on this one? I need some time to think about this. I've actually been thinking about this for the whole podcast, and I haven't got anything right now.
I think it would be...
The problem with Atlas Shrugged is if you did that, the game would have to stop halfway through for a 2-hour speech on the importance of objectivism and hard work and individuality, and then be all right, back to the game.
I think it would be very... Here's a... Serious answer versus unserious answer. One, I think it would be very funny to have a Western game after Fievel Goes West. An American Tail, Fievel Goes West.
Is that the second one?
That's the second one. That's the one where little Mousekewitz goes west to find a better life, and he becomes a gunslinger.
But they're like cork guns, right?
Yeah. I want a little mouse rounding up rustlers and shooting people with little pistols. That'd be pretty good. I'm always partial to Daft Punk's Discovery album. I think it's already with its music video with Interstellar 55555, the music video / anime that they made for that thing. I feel like you could extend that into an actual world, what they've made there, a world dominated by gold records.
I remember I was at a frat party one time.
I was at that frat party with you.
Right, were you there where they just played it on the screen the whole time?
Those assholes played the video, but they did not play the music.
Yeah.
Garbage. I don't want to hear Mr. Brightside by the Killers.
Hey.
I want to hear the whole album.
Don't you dare say anything bad about Mr. Brightside.
I'm not saying anything bad about Mr.
I will
Brightside.
ride or die for Mr. Brightside.
Okay.
I'm just saying that if you're showing me the music video to One More Time, I shouldn't hear Brandon Flowers' fucking voice. I should hear a robot man.
Mr. Brightside's a great song.
How
Yeah, I don't know.
how could we let Kesha's masterpieces influence games? That's a great Pete question.
Boogie
Blow
Feet would be pretty
Blow
good.
would be a pretty good one. Out Alive, you might be able to get through. Dinosaur would be funny, but I don't know if you build a game out of it. Blow would be the best one, though. You would be like a militia who has to take over. You need to be a terrorist cell holding hostage in a nightclub, or the SWAT team tasked with, basically fixing this hostage situation. It'd be like The Tower. Not The Tower. The Raid, but a video game.
But a video game, and also Kesha's
Raid's
there.
a video game. That'd be sweet, too.
Billy, do you have anything?
I do, but my idea is still forming. Let me go ahead and start and see if the idea of vocalizing it and maybe bouncing it off you guys can make this more well formed.
Okay, let's workshop this.
Yeah, let's workshop this. So, have you guys seen Donnie Darko?
Yes, I have.
We've seen Donnie Darko.
All right, just establishing that.
Unfortunately, I have. Yes.
Did you know that there's a website that is a complement to the Donnie Darko film that provides additional context and layers of mystery and complexity?
Because the movie makes no sense.
Well, the thing is, it was made as I don't know. I don't even know who made it, or if it was intentional, if it was fan made, or what.
I don't know if it's always been there.
There's this Donnie Darko website that you can go to that
predates the movie by 10 years somehow.
No,
sure.
It talks about I forget her actual name, Grandma Death. Whatever.
Death is a pretty
the
good
lady
name.
who was the time travel expert who wrote that book. And it has pages of the book and certain excerpts from the book and things about the town and other newspaper clippings and some kind of investigate, and you have to go to different websites outside of this website to look up stuff to put in codes that will let you unlock more of this website. And so what I would actually be interested, so this was done in a weird unsettling kind of way in Donnie Darko to make an already creepy, weird universe more creepy. But what it made me do was leave the movie, leave the website, go do some other research on a historical event, and almost an escape room, take some piece of cultural information and unlock something else in the game. So I'd like for maybe a game to mess around with the idea of, here's our game, but we're gonna put this barrier in front of you. You need to go look up this author and read one of their short stories and I don't
ARG
know,
games exist.
Yeah,
These exist.
I guess, but
Fez exists. There's all sorts of games.
When you say ARG, what's that mean?
Alternate reality game.
Yep.
Or
Yeah, I
alternate
guess.
reality game. They're games that there's the game that you're playing in front of you, but then you might need to go to some sort of website or some sort of QR code and then plug that in, and then once you get that information, it unlocks the next thing in the game. Those exist, and you could totally do that. And
Yeah,
sure,
Talos
Donnie Darko
Principle-
seems like a good place for that.
Talos Principle had a little tiny bit of it, and Her Story had a little bit of that, or at
but
least the
Fez
aesthetic
is-
of it. Fez has some of
Fez-
it.
It has like QR codes that you need to read in, and then the QR code leads you to something else, to some information that you need on like a website.
There's like this is a dumb example too, but there was a Metal Gear game where you needed a code from like the actual manual,
Yeah.
and you had to input it in the game.
I mean, it's going to sound weird like making it an escape room, because Escape the Room was like one of the most iconic early Flash games.
Right.
But stuff that makes you go research something else and bring it into the game as an enrichment tool, I think is really cool, and I wish more games would do it. And an example of that was the weird website compliment to the Donnie Darko film.
You know what
Well,
else?
then you should really finish Doki Doki Literature Club if you like that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, based on what you told me about it and what I've overheard, there's tons of it in there. And, Undertale had some of it too, but not so much by leaving the game world and coming back into it. But like I actually spent some time like modifying the save file of that game to try to like fight the fucking flower. Like I was like, well, what if I like modify his health or something so I can like just damage him in the game? I think that would be sweet. Like if there's like an unkillable boss, we got to open up some text file and like delete his invincibility. That'd be
You
sweet.
should play Doki Doki Literature Club.
Yeah.
Go, Pete.
Yeah, we could do this all day, but another good one. You guys ever read Dune? Like the Dune series?
No.
Yeah, well, read it. It's good. It's only like 6 books long. So, but if
Oh,
we
only.
took, yeah, right. If we took Dune and just made it a racing game where you just race worms around, that'd be a good one too.
That'd be pretty good. This also inspired me. What if I went the reverse way? What game would you want to turn into something else? And I was listening to the Les Mis soundtrack for a while, and I was thinking, Final Fantasy IX starts with a giant play scene, and how would you do the set if you wanted to make a musical out of that? Like, do you do it all? It's all framed.
How many
At
teams of actors would you need for a 120-hour play too? I mean, that would be like you'd have to act in shifts.
Well, I was just thinking more along the lines of, okay, which scenes can I cut? Which moments from this game do not need to be there to make it into a musical? How would you frame? I think the firmest vision I got was the first scene in Alexandria. You could do, it's all set on a big stage, but you could have 3 layers happening. You could have the people that are running around in the stands like Vivi and Puck, and then you could have the play that's happening, and then instead of having stuff happening underneath the stage, you just screw around with the geometry, and you have all the stuff with Steiner and Zidane and Garnet happening on like a stage like halfway up the stage. So you've basically got 3 layers all happening simultaneously. And then you could do set changes on each of those layers so that you're not always you don't have to do complete set changes. But that is an idea that I've been kicking around. We'll see. Question 2. Question 2 is boop, 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 boop. Sorry, my computer is being slow and bad.
I'd also, while Gino's looking for things, let me make another argument for Pokemon Sports. I think this is a dramatically overlooked idea that I still think is great.
Just playing sports with Pokemon?
Yeah, like...
You mean, are the Pokemon the balls, or
No,
are they like the players?
Like the way you have like Mario Golf and like Mario Tennis and stuff. Pokemon Sports.
We have Pokken, and that kind of is like a fight. Like that's like MMA Pokemon, I guess.
I want a Scyther holding a baseball bat.
We sort of had that in the first Pokemon Stadium game with all the mini games.
I know,
but
I want Diglett's throwing frisbees.
Dig.
Diglett playing soccer would be great.
Torn ACLs.
Oh no. Question 2. What is your favorite and least favorite episode of Deep Listen so far, either for the game itself or for the discussion?
All right, I'm gonna have to look over the entire archive.
Right, all of our back catalog. My least favorite is a tie between various Final Fantasy episodes.
Oh.
I'm Gino. I know those games. You're important to you. I know you like them a lot. I did like. What's the one I like?
9?
I think. What's your favorite?
9.
Yeah, 9 was pretty good. But we talk about Final Fantasy and they're so long, and I don't really like the series. But it's what we do.
Well, you only had to play 9.
I know.
That's the only one you've had to play.
9 was pretty good. If I had to play the other ones, I probably would have stabbed somebody.
Yeah, you wouldn't have been on the show anymore.
No, I would have been like, you know what? 2 years, good run. See you guys later.
Let me see. Ones that jump. I mean, I really liked the Final Fantasy 9 episodes. That was a game that I've wanted to talk with people about for a very long time. I like the Crystal Chronicles one because I didn't think that we would have things to say about that game going into it, and then when we played it, it ended up having way more going on than I thought.
You know, the one I didn't like was what was that puzzle game?
The Witness?
I think I actually picked it with the real the environment puzzles.
Yeah, you hated The Witness.
Yeah, I did. That, you know what? That's my new number one.
You just thought it was pretentious.
Yeah.
So I think we can all agree that Sonic Chronicles: Call and the Dark Brotherhood was just bad all around.
Yeah.
So let's just put that off on the
fun
side,
bad.
as we know that one was terrible.
It was fun bad.
Okay.
Big the Cat. Big the Cat. I feel Silent Hill 4 was probably the one I liked the least because I went in with expectations that I would at least like the game. I thought it would be okay. I ended up quitting that game halfway through because it was such fucking garbage.
Yeah, that one was bad.
It was really hard to play. It made no sense, and the act of playing the game was difficult, and it was long. It was all the things I don't like.
I think some of my favorite podcasts that we've done have been the Undertale podcast.
Ugh.
I think Firewatch was really good. I think our Ori and the Blind Forest podcast was really good.
Actually, you know what? I think my favorite is probably the Magic Pendulum show because we went in with no expectations. Right?
Yeah.
Just I could talk about that one scene for forever too. We don't have.
Yeah.
We've discussed it enough. It's great.
But that was a game that I went in and I was like, this is going to be fun. I'm going to draw some shit. And then we got through it, and what I thought games could be was different.
Yeah.
Coming out the other side.
Some of my least favorite have been Always Sometimes Monsters.
Yeah,
Ugh.
bad too.
Circuit Infinity.
Didn't play that.
It's kind of was.
I think that was just me and you, Billy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was.
Well,
you
also
too.
Ori and the Blind Forest was one of my favorites, and that was also just you and me, Pete.
Yeah. I like. What was the one with the big tower? You were the robot. It was clearly about religion, even though Billy didn't think so.
Talos Principle.
Talos
You mean the
Principle, I
one?
like that one?
You mean the one with Elohim?
Yep.
Not about religion at all.
Nope.
That is my favorite and least favorite because I am so fucking right. And
Oh yeah, nothing about religion. About a character named God.
Yeah, no, you're totally
we're
right.
not. My argument
Totally
wasn't that the game has
don't
nothing to
worry
do
about
with
it.
religion.
Don't worry
My
about
argument
it.
was that that's not what the game is trying to get you to think about.
No, I'm pretty sure they wanted you to think about it when they named the character God in Hebrew.
I can't. If that person who wrote it about level of saltiness, you should think back on that episode, dear listener,
That
because
was the saltiest you've ever been.
I feel like I was salty for the Goaty podcast, but I don't think it's probably a tough tiebreaker between the saltiness that I felt for the Talos Principle discussion and the Goaty Game of the Year Pyre losing to PUBG. Now there is one that I'm not sure if I should say, but we did a podcast pretty early on, relationship in games.
Yep.
I think the concept of that podcast was really good. It was one where we tried to That was, I think, the only podcast we've ever done where we did like multiple games in one show.
Yeah,
because
that was one of the only times we've ever done
one
that.
of.
Yeah, that was like our third podcast ever, I think. It was episode 4. And the one that we released, the one that we released to the public had a big chunk of it edited out, where I went on some kind of like rant involving I think it was about some kind of equality in like gender or like sexual identity or something like that. Like I went on a really big rant, and this was like fucking 3 years ago now. And that one kind of like put me in a bad place. I think it was a good discussion, but that one is one of my least favorite podcasts because we didn't really execute the 3-game discussion very well.
No, it's hard.
It was real hard, and there was like a big discussion point that wasn't like bad. I don't regret that it happened, but I just realized like I went off on like a real tangent, and I had to just cut out like 20-30 minutes of that original podcast for that.
See if you can find where that missing half hour is.
Was Shadow of the Colossus our very first one?
Very first one.
That was a good one too. I mean,
I liked it.
I wouldn't say it's our best, but it was a good way to kick things off.
Looking back, in general, our early podcasts did a little bit more about, and I guess the first ones that we all picked, which was Shadow of the Colossus, Psychonauts, and Fallout 3. Those are the very first 3 podcast episodes that we did. Each of us was trying to present a game and also like a philosophical or social concept and then examine them together. And we don't do as much of that anymore. I wish we did, but it's harder to keep finding more and more ideas. Like that's a pretty exhaustible idea to have some kind of like relevant social concept and also a game that talks about it. It's hard to find those. I just wish that we did a lot more of that, because those are the discussions that I loved the most, where we could spend good swatches of time not talking about the game, but like what the implications are of making it, or its, I guess, of its philosophical or social or cultural undertones. But that's just because I'm a philosopher. I want to argue about fucking anything.
The harder part is too when we come in with games. Like a lot of times I'm picking games I've never played before. I'm just excited. Like, oh, this sounds interesting. Let's check it out. So I don't really have a reading on the pick.
True.
That's the thing. We tend to balance picking games that we want to play with games that we have played and want to have a discussion about. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it turns out this game you wanted to play actually doesn't have, a great grounding for a discussion.
Like always, sometimes monsters.
Yeah. Or sometimes it's a game that you've, spent years thinking about and you can execute an argument from start to finish. And then, all 3 of our first games that we picked were games that we each loved and have played hours and hours and hours and know intimately, which really helps.
Right.
But I like the balance that we've struck.
Yeah, I think that we have an opportunity because we have 3 hosts, not just, patting ourselves on the back, but we have a person who is like heavy. I guess this is harder to say now, but I feel because like now we've been doing this for 3 years, we've kind of all like bled onto each other quite a bit. But back in day one,
Don't bleed on me.
We have a kid who had a huge, extensive background in games named Gino, who had a dual degree in like English Lit, but also computer science and coding and stuff. So like a unique perspective. I had this rich, also deep gaming background, but really didn't have as much English Lit or computer design or coding, but I had a lot of philosophy. Pete also had philosophy and also the English Lit, but maybe didn't have as extensive of a gaming background as Gino and I did. So we had like 3 very different perspectives, but the center point, like the circumcenter or the in-center of those 3 perspectives was this like cool little island of us examining games in these like really rich cultural contexts. And that's the thing that sort of sparks my flame the most in these discussions.
So what you're saying is we've got a Vanguard, an Infiltrator, and whatever the third hybrid class is in Mass Effect.
Yeah, like
Engineer.
Engineer, is it?
Yeah, we have
Whatever
like all 3
Sentinel.
hybrid classes here.
We've got a Vanguard, a Sentinel, and an Infiltrator.
Yeah, great. Sure. whatever analogy you want to draw, but I think that's really cool. So when I look back on our best and worst episodes, I think it's the ones where I think my best episodes are the ones where we as hosts are able to bring the most to the table from outside of the game experience because we have such rich, I guess, education perspectives. And the ones that I like the least are ones where we just kind of played this game and God, it was shitty or we had nothing good to say about.
Yeah. So question 3. We got our Billy story already and some endless ZP tangents, but what are some good stories about Pete and Gino? I feel like Billy needs a chance to fire back. So I took this question to mean a sort of self-deprecating story. Pete, I don't know if you have one at the ready. I can come up with some.
I mean, I always have a few. Did I ever tell you?
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, did I ever tell you guys? So this happened. I might have told this before, but I'll tell it again. It's a pretty good story. So this happened early on. I think this was actually my first semester teaching, maybe the second. And we're a couple of days in. I don't really know the students yet. We're still getting a feel for each other. And one day, this kid in the back raises his hand, and he's like, "Were you the Pete Busby who got I'll leave the name of my school out, but who got the talent show canceled at his grade school?" And I was like, yeah, that was me. And then I tried to just sort of brush it off and move past, but then everybody's like, no, tell us what happened. So when I was in the 8th grade, I did a version of Ice Ice Baby for the talent show. It was me and a buddy of mine. We each did it. And when I walked off the stage, my principal was there waiting for me, irate. She was a nun. Her name was Sister Ann. And she accused me of grabbing my crotch on stage while I was ice. I deny to this day, allegedly. Allegedly, I grabbed my crotch on stage. But from then on, they canceled the talent show because it was a Catholic grade school. Apparently, this was such a violation they could no longer permit students to express themselves. So my students asked me this, and the second day, and I'm already starting to lose them. I come in the next day, and everything's going fine, and a different kid sort of raises his hand in the middle of class. I'm like, oh, great, what is it now? And you just sort of pauses for a second. He goes, is that peanut butter all over your face? And I just sort of lick my chin, and I'm like, yeah, it is. So I went in 2 classes in a row. The first one, I had to tell a story about me grabbing my crotch on stage in the 8th grade. And the next one, somehow I walked in with peanut butter all over my face. It was a tough semester after that, to say the least.
That's pretty great.
Yeah.
How did the peanut butter get there?
I ate peanut butter for lunch, and I just, I like to eat with my hands. I'm a voracious eater, and some of it ended up on my face. It is what it is.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Well, for I have options for you.
Ooh.
Do you want to hear the only time I ever got sent to the principal? The only time I've ever been punched outside of a sporting event? Or the only time I've gotten lost from home?
I don't know. Lost from home.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard lost from home. I think I've heard the other two.
So when I was in grade school, at one day, one of the buses that was coming home, like the bus that I usually take, I think it left a little early or something. And so I missed my bus, and I had no way to get home. So one of my friends was still around, and his parents were picking him up. And so I said, oh, can I come home with you? And they were like, okay, whatever. They didn't think anything of it. And I was like, okay, I guess I have an impromptu play date now. This is great. He had a PlayStation, and that was awesome, and a Nintendo. So I was having a great time. But my parents, they didn't think it was so cool because they didn't know where I was. I just didn't. The bus came, and I wasn't there. And then they kept calling around, and no one knew where the hell I was. And so they eventually, I think, happened to call my friend's parents, and they said, yes, he's here. He didn't tell you that he was coming over.
Yes, we've abducted your child.
And my parents come, they're like, Gino, you just can't, what possessed you? Why did you not call us? Why didn't you say? And I was like, look, Mom, I don't know our phone number. And she said, what? I was like, I don't know our phone number. I don't know how to call you. You're old enough to know our phone number. Well, I am, but I don't know it. So I couldn't call you.
That's pretty good.
Interesting.
And so that was a tough one to explain.
Yeah. there's something that I learned recently that in my state, in my area, a lot of the kindergarten like requirements now for a lot of schools. I don't know if it changes from county to county or private to public, but a lot of kindergartens will now require that before they will admit a student, they need to know their parents' first and last names, their phone number, and their street address. Like if a student can't recite those things, then they aren't like ready for kindergarten.
I'm trying to think when I knew my parents' first names.
I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. Yeah, I've told the story of when I've gone to the principal's office, when I got sent to the principal's office.
I don't think you did.
Definitely not on the show.
I don't think you've told it on the show. You told me, I think, if it's the story I'm thinking of.
I don't think I've heard this.
Yeah, when I was in second grade, I
I'm thinking of a different story.
Okay. When I was in second grade, I was like I am now. I was very loud. I was very talkative, and I had finished Jumpstart third grade, so I knew all that second grade could teach me. So you were
precocious.
I was already had it down, and some kid was giving like they were leading a discussion or something, and I answered out of turn, and my teacher just said, you need to calm down. You need to go into the hallway. And so she had a chair that was outside in the hallway, outside of her door, and you were just sent to sit there to quote-unquote cool down. And I was sitting out there, and one of the students went out to go to the bathroom, and then when he came back, I opened the door for him, thinking I would be polite. And, that was fine. And then the second time, there was a set of twins in my class, and I saw one of the twins walking in the direction of the classroom, and I was like, oh, let me open the door, let him in. And it was the wrong twin. I opened the door, and the kid just continued to walk past the door.
Those sneaky twins.
And my teacher just went, look, if you're going to keep opening the door, you need to go to the principal's office. I was like, what? No. I was trying to open the door. It was a twin. I was trying to be polite. I was trying to do the right thing. Don't do this. And she sent me to the principal's office, and so I was then just sitting in the principal's office praying that everything would be okay, that my transgression would be forgiven. I prayed. I swore to my cats. I swore to my dog. Swore on my parents. Swore to God that I would never get in trouble again, and I didn't. Except that one time I got punched.
You got sent to the principal's office for being polite.
Well, no, I got sent to the principal's office for making a ruckus in class and
then pushing the envelope.
Outside. Yeah, but in my mind, the way that I was pushing the envelope was politeness, trying to help. But I can see where my teacher was like, "Oh, you're just being a jerk." She wouldn't have known that I wasn't lying. That like one of the twins walked by, but I wasn't the type to lie. So I think those are two stories. I can always tell the punching story some other day. If you would like to hear that story, email in. And the last question for the question show is, what are some good games / books outside of the pod? What are some good games / books you guys have been spending time with outside of the podcast? I'm looking for something new to catch my interest, which I'm bad about doing, and genre is not an issue.
Dune. Just telling these guys, read the Dune series. It's very, very long, but it's very good. I've only gotten 3 books in. Like I said, it's about 5 or 6. But it's a science fiction magnum opus.
Nice.
So part of the reason why I took a brief hiatus there in the middle of this past year was because I feel like I just wasn't able to play games for my own enjoyment as much, and a lot of why I play games at all is to sort of reset my mentality, and it's a good reset for me. So when I can get into a game that stimulates my mind in the way that I'm looking for, I just feel refreshed and energized and recharged. And the games that do that are like heavy with immersion, heavy with exploration, lots of collectibles. I mean, we know what kind of games turn on the grindfather, but
Love to turn on the grindfather.
I feel like I was feeling a little bit burnt out because was having a particularly stressful time at my day job, and when I would come home at night, I had to play a game that felt like work. And part of that was Persona, because Persona was a huge like bite to take for anybody. Persona's a huge game, and we had just done like the Final Fantasy ones, and I think I did one or two of the Final Fantasy playthroughs. I know I did the 8 one. I can't remember if I did another Final Fantasy game or not.
9. We all did 9.
Yeah, we all did 9, and then we did Persona 5, and that was pumping out like a podcast a week on like games that were very taxing to me, so I couldn't I couldn't play the games that I really wanted to enjoy. But now, 2 games that I have recently played and we haven't done podcasts on have been Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, which is out for the Nintendo Switch, and Elder Scrolls Skyrim, which I bought my copy for the Nintendo Switch, but it's my first time ever playing Skyrim. So both of these games are completely satisfying my need for an immersion-heavy, like, escapism into a new world, lots of adventuring, lots of exploring, lots of collectibles and that kind of stuff. So those are 2 games that I've been playing outside of the podcast. Other media, I don't really read books as much as I'd like, but I'm really digging a TV series called Mr. Robot. So if you're looking for a good, like, maybe a TV series that maybe you haven't heard of, that one's really good. It's been on network TV, so it's not like a hidden show, but I'm really into that one.
Yeah, so for me, outside of the show, I mean, I'm playing. The show is pretty much what I play in terms of games nowadays. I'm on these episodes and the ZP episodes, so I tend to be playing more show games than everyone else, so that eats up most of my gaming time. But the most recent book I read was actually Basketball is Jazz by David Thorpe.
Yeah.
He's a coach who does individual coaching for skill development for players. So he coached Udonis Haslem from the Heat, Kevin Martin, former Rocket, and I think he was on the Kings, Rockets, Thunder. He's got a few guys who are still in the NBA and people who bounce in between. He's coached some people in Europe, but the whole book is supposed to combine just kind of musings on coaching, musings on basketball, some useful stuff about, how to get better at the game, but also some anecdotes about the people that he's met and what made them good, or what, who they are as people. So it's a nice combination of technical stuff about the sport with the culture surrounding it and the people within it. So I really recommend it. He's got an amazing chapter on dribbling that I really enjoyed, how he coaches dribbling that you wouldn't necessarily expect. It involves White Chocolate, the player.
Oh, great ball handler.
Yes. I guess he spoke with him and asked, why do you dribble? How did you get so good at dribbling? And he just said, Coach, I'm just out here pounding nails. It's like, what does that mean? I just dribble it real hard.
That's 100% something Jason White Chocolate Williams would say.
Yes, and I'm just out here hammering nails. Well, and he thought about it. He's like, oh, actually, if you dribble it harder, the ball comes back faster, which means you can do more movements in the amount of time that it would take, because the ball is just moving faster.
Makes sense.
So when I teach people to dribble, I tell them, get out there, hammer nails, and if you lose the handle, do it in practice going 1,000,000 miles an hour. That way you can do it at game speed. So yeah, I would definitely recommend that book. It's a real good one. And games outside of the show, let me see. I mean, most of the ones I watch pretty normal, like prestige TV shows. That's pretty much what I watch. I just watched I think it's The Marvelous Miss Maisel, which is a pretty good Amazon Prime show. I'm trying to think if there have been any games I've played outside of the show in a while. Massive Chalice, I like that game, but wouldn't recommend it for necessarily everyone. Yeah, I'll say Basketball is Jazz. That's my main recommendation. All right. I think that's going to be it for our first email-only show.
All right.
Thank you to everyone for sending them in. If you want to send in more feedback about feedback, do so at DeepListensPod or at ThatPinguino on Twitter, deeplistens.libsyn.com. You can hit up our comment sections or deeplistenspodcast@gmail.com. And, remember, rate and review the show. Share it with people if you can. If you're listening, if you feel strongly enough to send in feedback, feel strongly enough to say, hey, friend of mine, maybe tune into the show.
And then they can send in feedback too.
It's like a pyramid scheme, but no one makes money.
No one loses money either.
Yeah. So, until next time, thank you, Billy.
Thanks everybody for tuning in. This is a new experience. I really enjoyed interacting with some of our most devout listeners, and I hope that we can do another show just like this in the future soon.
Yep, and thank you, Pete.
Always a pleasure. Like Gino said, keep sending in those messages, and we'll keep responding to them.
Till next time, peace.